Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We're going to continue with our theme, which we are following, this little series that we're doing from Ephesians 6. And we're going to turn to verse number 16. Ephesians 6. Just if you turn to that with me. Ephesians 6. And verse number 16. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the evil one. Of all the individual pieces of armour that we have discussed so far, this one is the most complex. It's also the most simplest. It's just that we don't relate to it the way that we should. Now you might say that's a rather strange statement. But we have to understand that this piece of the armour has a purpose. It's not just faith. It's an active faith that quenches all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Some Bibles might say of the devil or of Satan. But the point that it's coming across is this is an active faith designed to disrupt Satan's attacks. Now, we do not see that operational in the church on a day-to-day basis, yet every single individual Christian is meant to be fully armed with their shield in hand. So our question is, where's our shields? Where did they go to? Why do we not have them? You say, oh, I don't know about that. I'm sure we do have the shield of the faith. Well, when you understand those fiery darts, you might rethink that position. Because if we look at fiery darts, we have to understand that they relate to sickness, illness, problems, difficulties, depression, anxiety, pain. All the things that are hampering and stopping our successful progress in the Christian walk. All of these things. And yet, there was a piece of the armour designed to deal with it. And if we're not using it, more fool us. But if we don't even know it exists, that's a bigger problem. And that's where we are at the moment. We don't know what faith is. So how do we understand proactive faith that is able to protect you in times of trouble? So let's look at faith today. But before we do, I just want to go for one little thing, in case you're saying, well, surely that's affected all of the churches throughout all time. Well, I want to query that with you by asking you to turn to me with Revelations 3, verse 14. To the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, these things says the Amen, the faithful and the true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. I know your works. You're neither cold nor hot. And I wish that you were cold or hot. So then, because you were lukewarm and because you were neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich, have become wealthy, have need of nothing, and do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and get that last word, naked. No armour, folks. This church has no armour. It's got all these other problems as well, but it's got no armour. And this is the church of the last era. What's God's advice to this church? I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be rich. White garments, that you may be clothed. That the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see. For as many as I love, I rebuke and chastise. Therefore be jealous and repent. repent. The armour of God is not what the Laodicean church. They're in a bad state of affairs. And the truth of the matter is, it is the best description of the Christian church today, is the Laodicean church. All over the world we see a church that says it has power, but denies the power of it. Says it has the righteousness of God, but denies the power of it. This is what we're seeing all over the place. So we need to understand this word that has been brought to us, this part of the armour, faith. So when do you start learning about faith? Sounds a good enough question. Well, today we have got an example. A baby. How does a baby let you know when it wants to be fed? Does it reason with you? Does it send you a letter? Does it petition you? Does it nudge its sibling and say, go tell mum and dad? No. It cries out. It cries out. But does it know what it's crying out for? Well, no. And neither do you. You don't initially know if it's crying out because it's hungry, or if it's a dirty nappy, or if it has got a bout of wind that's affecting it, or if it's just lonely, or if it's just looking around for a while and saying, am I alone? Where is everybody? I hear nothing. And then it hears a sound. And that sound that it hears reassures it. What did God tell Israel to do when she was in trouble, when she was in difficulties? Cry out, I will hear you. So from the very beginning of the knowledge of understanding faith, we have to realize that we're told, as a child cries out into the dark unknown, believing, hoping someone will respond, God responds like its parents, quickly to meet its need and to reassure it. And God responds the same to us on a day-to-day basis. This is the beginning of faith, learning to understand how God reacts to a baby by its parents. How does the baby view its parents? Well, the Bible's clear. It sees them as God, because they are God's representatives. They stand in God's place for that child. And that's how it works. You must understand how these things are all tied in. So when Jesus came to give the gospel message, he came to a people who thought they knew everything. They knew nothing. So how did he have to start to teach them? Unless you become as a little child, you cannot receive the kingdom of heaven. What was he teaching? The kingdom of heaven. Unless you become as a little child. Cornelius had a problem with that. He said, how would I go about doing that? Well, he was told, it's a spiritual matter. It's not a physical matter. But you know, as we begin to examine the gospel teaching, as we begin to see how these things are brought about, we begin to realize the power of God to teach us, starting at the very beginning. We have been taught, because of education, that we learn from experience. But you actually were born a child of faith. You called out into the darkness and were answered. Always remember that. That's how you begin. But as you grow up and begin to reason things out, you get to the older than just being a little infant. And you become aware of certain things. You recognize the different voices in your home. You recognize your brothers and sisters. You recognize your mummy and daddy and your aunts and your uncles, your grandparents, and visitors that come in. And sometimes you go, oh, I'm not sure about that way, and get back a bit strange and standoffish. And other times you're welcoming because you're a baby. But you're coming to learn who these individuals are. Likewise, spiritually speaking, as we're growing, God wants us to learn who everybody is. He wants us to know His Spirit. He wants us to know Jesus Christ. He wants us to know and have a relationship with Him. But He also wants us to be aware of the fact that there are other entities out there who do not have our best interest at heart. And because they are there, we need to know how to recognize them. And just like a baby acts strange when a strange voice comes on the picture, we should also be acting strange when a strange voice starts talking to us. But sometimes, babies get what they call over-socialized. It's a modern word. It means they can't tell the difference between their family, their carers, and their neighbours, the strangers and all the rest who are around them, because to them it's all one big happy mix, because they hear and see everything. And that's what happens Christians as well. They begin to accept everything that's happening around them in this one big happy mix as they see it, unaware of the potential dangers that lurk therein. We need to be separated from the world. We need to be isolated within our families. We need to be guided and directed in the faith. And that's difficult in our day and age. But it's something that we have to learn. So, the first question you have to ask yourself as a child of faith is, how do you grow? Well, initially, you grow because you're fed with the milk. How do Christians grow? Initially, they're fed with the milk of the Word. What is the milk of the Word? Laying on of hands, baptism, resurrection from the dead, the rising of Jesus Christ. All of these things. But what happens after you have ate and drank all of those things or understand them solely? You're meant to move on to solid food. Do you know how many Christians do not understand the laying on of hands? Do you know how many Christians don't fully grasp the concept of baptism? Do you know how many Christians do not believe in the resurrection? It's scary. Oh, they might say, oh, Jesus resurrected, but we're going to go to heaven to meet him. They don't believe in their own resurrection because they're not taught it. They don't know anything about it. In other words, their milk has been watered down. So they're not getting the proper things. They are told, if you're sick, you go to the doctor. But that's not what the Bible says. It says, if you're sick, pray to God. If you're still sick, contact the church. If necessary, ask the elders to come and anoint you. And then you will be healed. Not might, will. At what point was the physician called? We're going to be looking at James soon. But think about this. At what point was the physician called? He wasn't. Why? Because if you are a child of faith, you don't need him. This is the problem, because we have been taught differently. And because we have been taught differently, we're sitting in two camps. More or less, a small stream with one leg on each side. This is what the Bible says on the right. This is what we have been taught, reared with and understand on the left. And sometimes they seem to flow very close together. But most times, they get wide apart. And we find that we have to make a decision. 1, 2. Which one are we going to go for? And because of the pressure the world puts on us, we frequently go to the left. We accept the world's view and we follow what is required. But when we do so, we step away from faith. And when we step away from faith, we step into works. This is the sad part. Works and faith are two different things, because works achieves as best it can righteousness through the acts you undertake. Faith assumes that somebody else had to do it for you. Faith always assumes somebody else has to do it for you. And that's the difference. You can't do it. Only God can. But we don't always accept that. This is why when Jesus was preaching the gospel, he said, look, here's the message I'm giving to you. It's going to become a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Greeks. Why? How could it be a stumbling block to the Jews? Because the Jews were law-based. They saw the miracles of Christ. They saw the preaching and heard the preaching of Christ. They were aware that it was the time for the Messiah to come. But he didn't quite meet their expectation law-wise. Therefore, they rejected him because of that. Do you think they all rejected him? No. We mentioned Nicodemus earlier, didn't we? He came in the middle of the night. He came to have a wee chat with Jesus. He says, first thing he says to him is, we know you are from God. Who? What do you mean you know? You know? No, we know. Who's the we? The Pharisees, the Sadducees. He's a representative of the council, the Shandin. He is there for them, for that purpose, to speak. That's why he comes in the middle of the night so nobody can see him. You should say, well, maybe he's just hiding. We live in a country called Northern Ireland. A few years back, well, quite a few years back now, there was secret talks that took place. Were they done in public? No. Yet you had supposed enemies come under a neutral banner to talk. Why? Because they wanted to find if there was a way of peace that they could come to. The Pharisees recognized Jesus as the coming Messiah. They wanted to find, is there a way where we can bring him in without causing a real mess to everything? So they arranged secret talks. It's very simple, it's very easy to follow, it makes very good common sense. And it also reminds us, remember John's the only one telling us these things. John shares so much information with us about what actually happened. We wonder to the rest of the disciples their times, but it's because they couldn't tell about it. Because John's gospel comes so much later, historically, when all these events have passed and there's no further repercussions. Now he can tell them what actually happened. So we have to understand this. The Pharisees understood this is Jesus, but they couldn't accept him because he wouldn't permit them to remain in the status quo that they had retained for thousands of years. It would have to change. All of Moses' teachings would have to change. And that was the first thing Moses said. Another teacher's coming after me, him you will hear. And they knew what that meant. He's going to change everything. He's going to be a totally different way of speaking. And they recognized Jesus was doing that. They recognized who he was, so he became their stumbling block. That's why the Jews have this feel. It's a stumbling block. It's in their way. They can't get past it until they accept the fact that they have to acknowledge who he is and step back. The Gentiles, on the other hand, or the Greeks, It was all foolishness. I mean, come on, think about this. Use your logical minds, okay? Here is what's being taught. If you believe that this man called Jesus, who was a relatively good man, healed the sick and all, you know he could do miracles. He could do miracles. But how many of them will stand through it? Well, we have hundreds of people who experienced it, so there's plenty of substantiation for that. I know, but I don't know. I'd have to see it for my own eyes. That's how the Greek mind works. We need proof. We need evidence. You might say, well, the Jews always wanted science. Well, they got their science. But the Greeks' concept was always intellectual. You have to prove it, prove it, prove it. So, preaching was total foolishness to them, especially when you come round to the bit where you say, and they crucified him. Roman crucifixion. It was a Roman crucifixion. Actually, real Romans did it. Aye, he was dead then. Oh, definitely. You won't survive that. We know you won't survive that. Nobody has ever survived that. And this is their concept, because they know exactly what it involves. And then 3 days later he's up out of the grave. No. Pull the other one. So they had a real problem with it. And if the gospel consisted only of the preaching of Christ, it would never have left the Holy Lands. It would never have got into the Gentile world, because they couldn't accept it, because they only understand from a reason concept. They have to prove it. They have to have evidence. But the gospel didn't just go out like that. It went out with power of signs following. Now, when we hear that word following, we frequently consider the fact that it means after. But that's not what it means. It means along with. Following means along with. Your wife follows along with you. Do you know what I mean? Do you understand the concept? She's not walking behind you. She's beside you, but she's following along with you. She's in agreement with you. And the signs are in agreement with the gospel. They proclaim the truth of it. And how did they do that? Well, for the Greek, if you had somebody who was sick, and you put your hand on them and they got well, that was evidence that what you were saying was possibly true. But that can't happen. And they know that can't happen. One of the gods would have to be among them to do that. And if you guys aren't the gods, then you must have been given the power by the God. So that means that you're telling us that this person, that makes sense. We understand now why he didn't die. He came back to life again, didn't he? He was one of the gods. To the Greek mind, suddenly it all snapped into place and they could accept it. Why? You just healed a man. A man got healed. And did they just heal? No, they cast out devils, they raised the dead, they did all the different things that were required. Last week I was telling you, or rather the last day I was speaking, Jack, who was last week? Sometimes one gets confused. I was telling you about Dorcas, or Tabitha. Peter got word when he was in Lydon, that could he come quickly to Joppa, because there was a problem. So he came. All the people were there, all her friends and relatives, all the local people, because she was a business lady and she made all these different things and she was a craft, So there was a lot of representation there at her death. And they were showing all the things she'd made and how she'd done all these different things. But the church had said to Peter, we'll bring you into her. So Peter came down. Yep, she's definitely dead. Told everybody to leave. Now he's got a choice. What is he going to do? He's either going to say, I'm here to conduct a funeral, or I'm here to heal her. I think the only thing they want me to do is heal her. That's what Jesus would do. So he put forth his hand and he said, Tabitha, get up. And she did. And he presented her alive to them. Now, this church is established. This lady has been working all along the line. She has a church in her house, and you know, lots of her neighbours know that she belongs to this Christian thing and all the rest. But all her neighbours have now seen her dead, and they knew she was dead, being resurrected by one of the teachers of this new religion. And do you think they're going to ignore that? No. Peter ends up having to spend quite a considerable time there, guiding, teaching, and preparing them for the kingdom, because they all believed. Why? Because he preached? No. He healed a dead person. Signs followed. How is this all related to faith? Well, you see, the whole point about faith is signs accompany it. They follow it, if you're following the concept. When Lydia cries out, wanting milk, wanting her nappy changed, she does so in the hope that she will be heard. And then when she's lifted up, she has the expectation that she's going to receive. And once she has received, she knows that whatever the problem is going to be addressed. So her hope is realized. It becomes completed faith. She sees the results of it given to her through the interpretation of her parents, or intervention of her parents. All right? Let's turn in our scriptures to, I think it's Hebrews 11. Now you might know where I'm going with this. Hebrews 11. This is the biblical definition of faith. In the King James, it's the New King James I'm reading from here, but in different Bibles you'll have it slightly worded differently. Faith is the substance of the thing hoped for. Lydia has an expectation. She's made a sound, she has an expectation. She has a hope. Faith is that cry. She's hoping at this point. But then it goes on to say, it is the evidence of things not yet seen. Because she knows that when her parents lift her and interact with her, she's going to have whatever need is needed. She's going to either be winded, she's going to be fed, she's going to have her nappy changed, she's going to be comforted. So she has learned that the moment she gets a response to hope from her call, she will automatically have the fulfillment of whatever her heart's desire is. That's faith from a baby's perspective. Guess how you're meant to understand it? Exactly the same way. But what stops you? Well, let's take it another step. Let's bring it to you. Let's read this from your perspective. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for. What are you hoping for? I don't know. Why do you not know? Well, I'm not sure what God will give me. I'm not sure what He would allow. So we're back. Do you think God could heal that? I think He could. I've got a sore head. Do you think God could heal that? I think He could. But do you think He could? This is the question. I can know, but maybe if I ate something that would help me. Maybe it's something to do with my blood sugars. Are you still hoping? No, you've now justified why you're not well. In other words, because you are adults with adult minds, you automatically create a reason why these things won't work, or can't work, or are not needed. It's an automatic thing. You have been taught this for literally years. As you've been growing up, you've been taught this is how things work. This is the normal. So you start to depend on other things. That wee tablet will help me because it helped me before. Or they tell me it'll help me. I'll take it and try it. A wee bit of food will help me. A wee cup of tea will help me. A wee rub on the back. Oh, you know, if I went down to see that woman down there, she's supposed to be able to help me. You know, she might cut the head of a chicken and string it around a bit, but what do we care about that? She'll help me. But they won't go and trust in God to help them because by experience they have been taught not to. Yet as a baby, each and every one of you was taught perfect faith. But as you grew up and began to question, you just walked away from it. What happened in the Garden of Eden? What happened to Adam and Eve? They had a perfect walk with God until they were deceived. And it was suggested to them that maybe God had a reason for not allowing them to eat of that fruit of the tree of life of good and evil, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Maybe he didn't want them to know that for some reason. And what did they do? Gobble, gobble, gobble. And what happened? Their eyes were opened. They became aware of things they should not have had to know. They became aware of how certain things work. Their innocence was gone. That's exactly why you've got to remember when God is talking to Christians, he's talking to a baby. You have to become a baby. You have to understand you must be solely, completely and totally reliable or reliant on him. For he is reliable. These are the things that you need to understand. This is the hard bit. Understanding faith. And that's just standard faith. How do you operate in the faith where you perform miracles? Jesus said, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you'd be able to say to that tree, uproot yourself and go and plant yourself in the sea. And he didn't say, and in a couple of 100 years, somebody will come along and do that for you. He said, the tree will do it. It will happen, it'll occur. Why? Because you have said it. If you have the faith, it'll do it. That's active faith. We are told that as we believe, so we should speak. And that's a problem for us. We all know the Bible inside out. And we know it because we've been taught it, we've studied it, we've read it, we understand it. And this bit he does with these little marks, we believe it. Why? Because that last bit's not true. You don't believe it. Because if you believed it, you would do exactly what it said, and none of us do. Ever since Adam, we have failed to follow and perfectly obey God. It has always been our downfall. Therefore, the apostles were quite simple when they said, all have sinned. None have the glory of God. All of us have sinned. All of us failed to believe God. That's what it means. We don't have faith. But without faith, we can't do a thing. So we have to be people of faith. To please God, to be able to please God, you have to have faith. That's Hebrews 11 verse 6. It's scary, isn't it? When you start looking at this one little thing, you think, oh, it's just a matter of lifting this shield and walking. Anyone see my shield? I'm about to fight this guy over there and I've lost my shield. Tell him to wait. Is that how it works? No. If you don't have your shield, you can't fight. Or you can't stand. It's one of the two. You can't fight or you can't stand. If you can't fight, you're running. If you can't stand, you've been killed. It's simple as that. And when you go and you're standing before God and he said, what happened? He said, well, I couldn't find my shield. He says, you never had it. I've been preparing shields for you for a long time. They're all there. every time I got a couple of boards put into one, you reject it and walked away somewhere else. You have no faith. It's terrible to consider a church that has no faith. So what do? How do we get that faith? Well, funny enough, because when a person becomes a Christian, they are a new being. You have a new birth. You can relearn faith. But you're also an adult, which works against you because you also have this tendency to doubt everything. So, what you need is something that would help you get over your doubt. Let's go back to Lydia. At this moment in time, she is not able to talk. But she hears people talking all around her. And what she starts to do is gurgle. It makes absolutely no sense to us, but we love hearing it. God wanted you to learn, so he gave you a gift of that. He called it tongues. He says, I want you to learn faith, and I'm giving you a gift to teach you faith. I'm giving you tongues. You won't understand a word you're saying, but you have to say it in order to grow in faith. How does it work? Well, you see, every part of your reason is going to turn around and tell you that this is gobbledygook. This is stupid. This is madness. You're not making... How could something be talking in you? You know you're making it up as you're going along. That's your logic talking. But God has said, I have wrote it in the Bible. I have told you through the apostles and the prophets that I have given you this gift, and for the purpose of building your faith. You say, I don't know where it says that. The man who speaks in tongue edifies himself. What's faith? It's your edification. It's how you're edified. You have to understand this. You've got to get the two together. You've got to realize the purpose of it. You say, I don't believe I need to speak in tongues. What would happen if a child never... What if it never gurgled? What if it only could cry? What if it only could lay a high-pitched screech out of it every so often, but nothing else? Well, you would have a problem with its concept of it developing language. And this has happened. There's children who, because they never hear people talking around them, never actually develop a desire to speak. And that's most in the church today. You just don't hear it because it's not evident among you. You say, well, there might be a wee set out there that do it. But we don't agree with them. But you see, that's not true. Speaking in tongues has been operational in the Roman Catholic Church for 2,000 years. Speaking in tongues has been in operation in the Church of England since Henry VIII. Speaking in tongues, I was going to say Presbyterian Church, but I really can't say that. But let's say certain elements of Scottish churches do have it. But you see, the point is, no matter where you go, no matter how far back in history you go, there has been evidence of speaking in tongues in all of the traditional churches, but then it got stamped out. Because each of these churches, at one point or another, were new, refresh breaths of the Spirit. Methodism, spoken tongues. All of them, spoken tongues. At the beginning. So you can't turn around and say this is not of God. Because he can't get you to understand faith If you're so wrapped up in the world that you're embarrassed to speak to him in secret in an unknown tongue. In secret. He doesn't even ask you to do it in public. He knows he never gets to do that. But he says, look, I want you to do it when you're in your closets, alone, by yourselves. I want you to trust me. Just open your mouths, and like a little baby, let the Spirit speak perfect praise through you. And it'll start off with gabba wabba wabba wabba. It will. But then it'll change. Now, because it says in the Bible that you are not to have speaking in tongues in a church service without interpretation, I do not wish to speak in tongues today. But I do have interpretation. And perhaps in some cases you've been hearing the interpretation of what I've been saying to you in tongues all along. You need to hear that for faith to grow, to start to mature, you have to learn to trust that God can do the impossible. And just like a little child has to be taught by simple principles, the first thing he does with you is say to you, look, you want to talk to me. First understand, I have given you the Holy Spirit who can speak on your behalf. If you open your mouth, you can hear him speaking. You can vibrate, you can hear and make it oddly. Get it all out so that you can be able to get the sound. But that still doesn't prepare you for the faith that you need. It's only the beginning. Because when you have got faith, then you have to walk in it. And that means against every possible thing that could stand against you, you have to be willing to accept the fact that God is greater. Do you remember the disciples in the boat? You all remember the disciples when they were on the boat. Jesus had fallen asleep. He was tired. Storm had cleared. The storm was getting rough. Now these are hardened, experienced sailors. Each one of them knew the lake like the back of their hand. And this storm terrified them. And they looked, and there's Jesus sitting there asleep. And they're worried for their lives. So they woke him up. He looked at them. He looked at the storm. He got up. Put his hands up. Be quiet. Be still. He turned back to them. Have you still got no faith? That was his response. Have you still got no faith? You would have thought under the circumstances, he'd have went a wee bit easier, but he didn't. Why? Because they didn't understand. They thought what they were seeing in the physical, in their environment, what they understood was real. They didn't realize God is over and above all of that. That's what faith is. Simply knowing God is above it. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, no matter what you understand it to be, no matter how bad it could be, God is better than that. And you trusted him to sort it out. It's as simple as that. You need to have a shield of faith. Because that shield would allow you to be able to resist all the fiery darts of the enemy. Every one of them. And they consist of fear. They consist of problems, sickness, depression, anxiety. They consist of panic. They consist of everything. All the worries and concerns that plague you every day are fiery darts from the enemy. Some of them are very real. Some of them, you're more afraid of them hitting you when they're not even fired. But you need the shield of faith. Then you don't have to worry at all. Because they all get snuffed out because God is more powerful than everything. So let's figure out how we're going to get our shield polished, prepared, and right war as we go through the rest of life. Thank you.